Good morning. Welcome to Expo. So today's a little different for those that have been on Fridays before. It's mix and match, so you don't have to be stuck in this room just doing the reading stuff. You can be moving around elsewhere. So have a look at the timetables and hopefully you'll find something useful to do with the day. There's nice gaps between the sessions, so you don't have to rush from one place to the other, hopefully. And not wanting to empty the room straight away, but if you want your certificate, they're in the atrium bar on the right-hand side. They're in sort of like all the S's, all the T's, etc. So you just got to go through them and get your certificate. So if you want to go now, then no, okay, fine. So I've got mine. I can go home after this. So this morning, I'm just going to start off, as I've done on the industry days in the past, just looking at some of the reports that have come in and reflect on it and take questions, and we can discuss things. We've got a bit of time. It's not going to take me 45 minutes to run through them all. If you are going to ask a question, can you put your hand up and then we'll get the microphone to you, because it is being recorded for other people to look at in due course. So we won't know your question if you don't have the microphone in your hand. So if you've got a question, just wait until we get the microphone to you. So throughout last year, there were a number of reports. We had a couple of safety informations. We haven't issued a BPA, British Skydiving Safety Notice, for quite a while now, because most of the manufacturers are good at getting information out there, and Karen's great at making sure I get to see them, so she digs them out. I think I found one that she hadn't sent me, and that was about it. So great, but if you come across something, or if you come across an article, Karen did that as well with one of the articles that was in Parachutist, which highlighted something. This year they've had about 3 things, and I'll reflect on a couple of them that were quite interesting, I think, from a rigging point of view. So we'll look at that as we go through as well. So first safety information notice we put out goes back to last winter and was the subject of tool control. So for those of you involved in packing reserves, it never goes away. It's not the first. It won't be the last. I think it's the first time we've had a clamp in the middle of a pack job. But it is something that we need to be aware of as we go through things. And we do try and emphasise that in packer training. Then we had an issue with tandem loops, the double-ended loops, which did that. So that was quite interesting. Couldn't spoil your day. UPT issued a spec for how to make loops. I'm not aware of Next actually publishing a spec. They're not the same. Dimensions are pretty much the same, so but you do need to make sure that you're actually catching the ends on that one. And then that had a safety information on it. We put that one out even though there was just the one incident, because it thought it was just kind of worth reminding people that you've got to take a bit of care with these things. So that was really all that the office issued. Parachutes de France, Safran, issued quite a few in the course of the year. Quite a few of them were actually also building on previous years, because this one with checking the top flap, that's on a tandem system, followed on from last year's, which was checking the top flap on a tandem system. Obviously, it got worse. Don't get a red one, that's what I can say. It's just like kind of seems to be a wrong thing. And Parachutes de France seem to have done that with bits. But it's not only Parachutes de France that have had this kind of problem. I remember putting together a Javelin, and it was a bit of a tight squeeze. And when the top flap came off in my hand, I kind of thought maybe I'd been a bit rough. But when we sent it back, they kind of went, yeah, we got about, not even a mil past the stitch row. It was just like there was nothing really being held there at all. So it had slipped through at some point. So it is that thing about inspecting, and if you're not a packer for reserves and you're just aware of your own kit, seeing frayed bits, seeing pulled threads, definitely something that we want to be looking at or drawing to the attention of somebody else. Okay, so there were a number of issues with pilot chutes and things. This was a crew rig, and the pin itself got caught into the weave of the Dacron, which basically then made a closed loop, and it was just locked. which, you know, crew jumpers hopping and popping, they've got time, you know, they're nice and high doing that, but doesn't make for a very good four stack. So, you know, it's kind of a bit of a problem. We have seen that problem with a pin going into the Type 3 on a collapsible in the past as well. So it is something about, well, where does the excess get routed and where's the pin, and bits and pieces on it. But the thing that I really wanted to highlight on this is the number of reports that resulted in reserve activations to do with pilot chutes in tow. And that's not a rigging thing, is it? But some of us in the room are riggers and instructors, and we're all jumpers, so it's all flight line checks and it's other things. And we don't seem to be getting away from it. You know, it was like a handful of reports resulting in reserve repacks to do with pilot chutes in tow. Misrouted bridle. That one looks wrong. I missed one on a flight line last year, and I know I would have been looking at the bridle because I was discussing the previous person about routings of bridles while we were doing that flight line check, so I was not going to forget it going to the next one. But it didn't look like that, but it was there. And it's not only around here, we see it in other places. Parachutists, keep an eye out, as there are a series of articles. And yep, that looks fine. At first glance, it's folded in and out, except you then realise that it's actually underneath the flap there. But at first glance, you're going, oh, they've done it in and out at the bottom, which seems to be quite a common thing now, rather than using the little bit of Velcro. But then you realise it's completely gone that way. When we were down at Old Sarum last week, Roman, the rigger down there, set up one of the Sigma rigs, and the drogue bridle was routed correctly in that it came out under the right flap, but because it had looped underneath the stiffener of the rig, the flap underneath, we could pick the rig up. So there is a thing about how much you stuff underneath the side flap, where that goes, and it's like, if you're in any doubt at all, lift the bridle and see if it pops a pin. If it doesn't, you know you've done it wrong. So it is a thing. But I was just surprised by the number that we'd had throughout the year of things. Sort of, apart from the crew one, there was at least 5. I didn't go and double check. I was just kind of ticking them off as I went through. So yeah. Stiff pulls. Number of people, number of Brits abroad as well. What causes a stiff pull? So from the rigging side of things, what things do we look at that can affect a stiff pull? Too tight a back pocket, too big a pilot chute. That would be pretty hard to make a stiff pull, to be honest, for most people. A badly fitting rig where you're not getting the leverage to, not really a rigging matter, but is a thing. The stiffeners on PUDs now, and some now have them on both sides. And one of them, that was the reason identified by the user, that he just changed over to having a stiffened PUD and couldn't extract it. Well, perhaps he should have practiced that on the ground rather than opening point, but ended up with a reserve ride. But it is a thing, maybe when, as riggers, we're making them, or as packers, when we're assembling a new pilot chute with stiffeners on, is that the customer knows how it's going to be working and things. So, lines. So at least 3 reports, and I say at least 3 because I suspect that the odd snap line doesn't get reported. So snap lines that end up in a reserve ride tend to get reported. I don't think that every reserve ride in the UK ends up with a form filled in and sent through. I think there are several that get missed because I will do that at the end of the day and you're halfway through the week. Tandem ones, student ones, yeah, we probably do, but sport jumpers, sport jumper snaps one line, lands it, gets it fixed, doesn't necessarily bring it to the chief instructor to tell them there was a problem, because maybe there wasn't a problem. These 3 reports ended up with reserve rides. And then we had fluid wings with 400-pound lines. Although when that grounding came out initially, the little bit of digging that people did suggested that the limit on the jump numbers that are supposed to be on 400-pound lines and smaller was somewhat exceeded, and things. And the lighter lines, the manufacturers of the canopies are normally saying, don't do terminal openings, or only do X 100 jumps on it and then change the lines. And my understanding was the one that highlighted this had exceeded that, so it was outside the thing. But they still kind of put a notice out about inspecting them and making sure. So that's what came out from the manufacturer. And then not too long afterwards, then we had another one with 300-pound line. Coming in, and they're saying there's been an increasing number of incidents. So they were looking at then what they were doing. But then on one canopy, when they were breaking lines, they actually put a thinner line on, and that stopped the tangling process. So it's like the engineers, the canopies have kind of got some strange ideas sometimes. But just general line wear and tear, definitely something we need to be aware of. On the PD website, they've got the pictures for each of the things with kind of wear and tear, and they're quite good pictures, and they're quite interesting. So if you haven't seen them, have a look. You can trace it through there. Don't know if anybody's got any comments or wants to say anything about lines or anything we've said so far.
Thank you. So we had a couple of pilot chutes in tow, and it was, and what we've done is we've actually made it mandatory now to do an inspection of the main at the repack. And that includes pilot chute, deployment system, everything. Is there any move to make it mandatory within our system?
One of the things I'll be reflecting on this afternoon is we are looking, and when we've looked at the repack cycle and whether we're going to extend that or whatever, and the fact that should we be inspecting the main as normal during an inspection process when reserve comes in for a repack. They don't have to give us the main, but if they do give us the main, then we should be looking at the components and bits and pieces within that. When the ROI first came out many, many moons ago, we had the main on there. And then we decided that we didn't want it on there because owners and packing certificate holders can change the main, change the risers. They can just do those things. So what are we signing for? But then when you think about it, it's like if you take your car in for an MOT and you've put the spare wheel on, or you've nicked the wheel off your mate's car because you know yours is illegal, you drive it in, you pass the MOT, you give him his tyre back, you've still got an MOT certificate, and it says that at the time of inspection it was okay. So I know with the kit hire places, they tend to write on the ROI what the main is, because it's just easy for policing and everything else. But I think more and more packers now are tending to write extra information on the ROI, which are things like the loop length or the number of jumps on the AAD, so we can track the number of jumps done in a repack cycle. So it really doesn't take too much, does it, just to jot down the serial number if you can read it on the main, and then you've looked at that and you've covered those bits and pieces. So I don't think we can make it a mandatory thing that all mains must be, because people can change them mid-season. But I think as part of the inspection, that's something we should be looking at and things.
It's surprising to hear Lang has done that, but I actually like it. 30 years ago, I suggested the same. I've never packed a reserve in 30 years without packing a main and seeing it fully packed. So I know that when that customer jumps, he's got it fully packed. To me, any rigger is not giving a rig over. They fully packed with everything. It's not doing their job right. The fact that we're taking things off the inspection form, I think it should have stayed on there, because we can still sign for the main pilot chute, the bridle line, the risers, the main. So if somebody turns up with the main to me, then I'm sorry, I can't pack the reserve. You've got to see it fully packed in my view. So I actually like what Lang has done there.
Okay, just some thoughts and ideas kicking around.
The next question that I have is about black Vectron line. So we've noticed, and certainly I've had conversations with Kim Newton about the wear on black Vectron line being very sporadic. So you'll get a patch here and a patch there and a patch other. And I think some of the manufacturers have actually withdrawn it now from use. Have you got any further information on that?
I haven't. Don't know if anybody else has that experience with different colours of Vectran line or whatever. I mean, when Vectran line first came out, it was only in, I'm going to say, grubby white colour condition, because it always looked like they were scruffy old lines when it first came out. And then they started colouring them and they coated them differently, and they do seem better. But no, I've always wondered with the colours, because you see the fading and you see everything else. And you know, nice bright orange, but then you look at the white patches and you, okay. So maybe the colour works because it attracts your attention to the bits that aren't that coloured anymore. But yeah, I haven't heard from the manufacturers with anything on that, but maybe they're just not doing it as an option rather than going, oh, there's a problem with things. But be interesting to see, and if people are seeing a pattern, then, you know, raise it and we can actually look out for those things. So I don't get feedback. Brake toggles. Again, a very basic thing, which in some ways, and 40 odd years in the sport, I kind of think, have we learned about brake toggles by now? But yeah, we had a number of instances with brake toggles. Nice little brake fire on a tandem could spoil your day. So happily blanked out the person. That was one. And there were 6 reports of brake fires. And one of them didn't end well. Again, is it a rigging thing? It's a rigging education thing. And probably don't get me started on educating jumpers, because this is the wrong audience, because you're all here. It's the people not in here and not next door with Lucy that are the people that, you know, we need to worry about. And how do we get that information out there? Why are people setting brakes wrong? Headcorner is not the only place with pictures up of how a brake is supposed to be set and how a brake is not supposed to be set. I've seen it in other centres. We're all out there watching it. It's a thing that we'll walk down a packing hall and we'll just go, do your brakes again, you know, and re-educate people. It's like we keep seeing it. Brake locks. My pet hate is the way people stow the excess of brake lines. Thanks for nodding, thank you. I'm not the only one. Because stow the excess, you know, please. There is a reason for not putting your hand through it and not tying yourself in knots. Again, parachutists had a thing on it last year. 2 reports, so it's not that significant. But they resulted in reserve rides. So how many out there didn't? I'm an accuracy jumper. The number of times we have brake locks or we have something weird going on with our brakes, that's because we do weird stuff with them and we have hard toggles and we do all sorts of things. But I'm jumping a very slow, docile canopy. It gives me time to sort things out. A 170 is not slow and docile if you've got a brake locked on. You know, it's like we need to think about these things. Really? Now, this wasn't brake lines breaking. You know, I did come across a picture of, you know, is something missing, and there's one nice brake toggle with a toggle and one nice brake line with nothing on the end but a bit of broken string. But this was actually toggles just coming off. One was the person jumping it had put the toggles on, so either he shouldn't have done or he should have known better, one or the other. And the other one had given it to somebody to do and then just assumed they'd done it right and the toggle comes off. Really? You know, I cannot come up with an explanation for why we should end up with a toggle coming off unless we've broken the line. Something People are doing things that they shouldn't be doing because they don't understand it, in which case ask. It's not hard to put work. I have another thing though, we don't see it too much now unless with crew jumpers and things. Dacron lines with umpteen knots down the end. It's just like, don't do that either. It's like, anyway, pet hate. But, you know, to me, these things, they're minor things that we shouldn't be seeing, but we are. And, you know, we've got a dozen more reports of reserve rides that were totally avoidable. Set your brakes right, you know, route your bridle correctly, you know, have a look at your lines. It's like, it's not rocket science, is it? Okay, missing bar tacks on Aerodyne canopy. Again, not the first time we've had this from a different manufacturer, Parachute France, and others, more than one. And again, yeah, picked up in an assembly, and it was just quality control had failed at some point. Don't assume when you're assembling a canopy that quality control picked everything up. So it is something that we've got to do. I did a reline a couple of years ago, and the customer came back to me and complained about, you know, one of the bar tacks and didn't like it and everything else. And I went, okay, fair enough. So you sent me a photograph of it. And I went, yep, totally missed that on the assembly. Totally agree with you. It wasn't the bar tack I put in. It was one that came from the manufacturer. And it was like, but I'd missed it. It only needed redoing, but it's like, yeah, don't trust the manufacturer's quality control, basically. They're normally good, but things can go wrong. We had one reserve canopy, which we were totally puzzled about, it wasn't last year, about how we could route it to kind of connect all the lines up. Because the last bit that you sew when you put it on a line set is the stabilizers, and they'd managed to trap a line between the stabilizers. So it was just there, and it was just like, and you just, no, there's got to be a way of undoing that. And it like, oh, no, there isn't. And it's a reserve. So it's like, all right, you have to unpick the bar tack to move the line. It was like, we sent it back. Just like, come on, this brand new reserve. I'm not starting to unpick bar tacks on it. It's like, that was a few years ago now. But it is something that we need to kind of be watching out for. Didn't feel the need to put a safety bulletin out on that because the manufacturer was aware of it, sorted it, everything else. Just something we just need to be looking for when we're assembling. Again, from parachutist, wear and tear on cables. How many broken fibers can we afford to have in one of these cables? None. Okay, good. Because they hurt when you cap it on your finger and then you bleed on the rig and then it's like a real mess. So it's just like, no, okay. Don't do those things. So we don't see quite as many instances with links these days because so much is soft link, so we see other problems. No link lasts forever. I had one canopy that was getting through steel links every 200 jumps because the slider was smashing into it every time. I put soft links on, then it started damaging the risers. But yeah, that was another thing. Put a bigger slider on, that was a much better idea. But again, this came out before Christmas in Parachutist. So again, they're kind of aware of issues with links, which followed on with a conversation I had with Doc Carter about how much do we tighten a link? Anybody? Okay.
But that depends.
So, no offence, but you know, I'm going to pick on Julia rather than Karen because she's there.
Oh no, Julie's
So,
really strong.
Julie goes to the gym, so she's got really strong fingers, you know, whereas I'm not, so I don't. So it's just like, so she can probably tighten up a link tighter with her fingers than I can. How much, you know, with a spanner and what have you. So John Carter decided, well, okay, let's look it up. You know, there must be a spec somewhere for it. So he looked it up, and sure enough, PD have a spec, UPT have a spec. They're exactly the same, and if you do the maths, they're wrong. because the two units that they use do not correlate. So the inches, pounds, inches, and the whatever. And so we're waiting on the reply. Mark's focus has sort of gone, yeah, I've had the email, passed it on to engineering. And we haven't had the answer back as to what it is. So somewhere along the line, somebody was tasked with, we need a spec. Somewhere along the line, it got lost in translation, and everyone's cut and pasted it ever since, and it's exactly the same words. So we don't know. But if you looked at one of the specs in the UPT manual, and you then go to the Malon manual as to what they say, it's factors out, completely different. So link issues, last year, the French decided that non-stainless steel links couldn't be used on any canopy, yet some manufacturers still send their mains out. If you want metal links, they come out on non-stainless steel ones. Ask PD, and they've never issued anything that's not stainless steel or soft link. So it's like it comes out differently from different manufacturers. But links, again, an old subject, but something that we keep seeing. And Rick's got the microphone.
I will set the cat among the pigeons. Morning. We had some interesting questions a few years ago within the MOD about repeat links. I wasn't the only one to say, why are you only using these once? And the answer that came back was, repeat links are a one-time use item. That really set the cat among the pigeons, didn't it? You're not supposed to undo them, tighten them, undo them, tighten them. You're supposed to put them on. This is from Repeat. You're supposed to put them on, tighten them to the torque, mark it, and that's it. And if you unscrew them again, you bin it. It's not just an MOD they like to spend money thing. It's actually, there's a little expense for the entire sport across the world, isn't it?
Yeah.
We're supposed to be using them once only.
Yeah. I was not aware of that, so there you go. So
Neither was I.
Yeah, interesting. Other safety bulletins, didn't bother circulating these too widely. Tandem atoms, I'm not aware of any tandem atoms being used at other drop zones. So I think possibly last year there were 2 tandems on atoms ever jumped in the UK by me. So yes, I have done that on mine. And I've got to look at that before I use it again. So a couple of notices came out. Parachutes to France, their customer service is not great. And I actually think they don't slag off companies, etc. But anyway, the products are really good. And they are now sending out information. Well, they don't send it out, you've got to look it up, but it's in there and it goes out through the French Federation about 6 months after it comes out from the manufacturer. So it's kind of, that's just the French, really. So. Again, thank you, Karen. Highlighting various things. Again, not a new subject, talking about manuals. So this is anybody that packs and things. And we have a rule within the UK that if you're packing a reserve, you should have the manual open at the right page. It's not quite written like that, but that's generally what we're meaning at. But it means have the right manual and the right version of the manual. And I'll pick on Parachutes for France again, because they used to have 3 different ways through time of how many flaps they had. And they used to have 2 flaps underneath the reserve. Then they had 1 flap and a little stubby bit without a grommet. And then they had no flap. So if you picked up the wrong manual, it's a manual for an atom. But if it was the whatever version, you're trying to find a flap that doesn't exist anymore, and it's things like that. And we thought we'd moved away from that with online manuals and bits and pieces. But we're now finding manufacturers are updating the manuals, but forgetting that there are legacy rigs out there that should be on the other manuals. This is the wings, isn't it? Yeah. They actually did say there are 2 things. We've changed something, which is kind of nice. Not sure that all the pictures in their manuals are that useful. And trying to pack it by the manual. I know Karen did this thing with doing a CPD exercise of actually trying to pack by a manufacturer's manual step by step. And that was quite interesting, I think. Yeah, well, yeah. So it is a thing with the manuals. Make sure you're doing the right one. make sure it's the right version, whether you're routing the cable over or under. The manufacturer's got a theory on it. We might have a different theory. British skydiving rules take precedence over manufacturers' rules if we've got a rule, but if we haven't, we're on safer ground if we are doing what the manufacturer says. But if they're saying two things, you've got to be saying the right thing for the right version of that rig, which is a bit of a minefield at times. So it's just flagging it up, really. I mean, I've still got a collection of paper packing manuals in the packing shed because I'm old and my eyes don't work very well. But I think most people now have a tablet and they're kind of working off their phone or a tablet when they're packing, which hopefully means you've got the latest manual. But that doesn't mean it's the right one because you might have a legacy rig. So be careful about which rig you're looking at. And then we're kind of looking not at the instance, but things that are coming up, syllabus changes and things. So we now have a separate syllabus for packing round reserves. How many we're going to be working on that. That then highlighted the fact that the wording in the other syllabuses don't quite match up, so that's coming up. And every rigger syllabus, basic rigger, parachute rigger, advanced examiners, the examiners had a meeting in December and we've come up with improvements to the syllabuses, which will be at the next riggers meeting, hopefully. So watch this space. There's also new forms and guidance and bits and pieces. So last year we changed the AP bit with the supervisor for while you've done your course, you haven't done your exam yet, and we've opened that up so that it doesn't have to be a rigger. It can be an experienced advanced packer who's on the list, so they're signed off by a rigger to do that job. At the moment, I'm only aware of one form coming in, so it's not a big thing, but it does mean that there are scope for people training to be advanced packers, haven't got a rigger around, but they've got somebody with hundreds and hundreds of reserve repacks that they can get cleared for doing the supervision bit while they're building up their numbers. And then we're working on other guidance for supervising riggers and other bits and pieces. So the next meeting later this month should be quite interesting, or not. There's a lot of paperwork to get through. And thank you very much. We actually had 3 rigging courses during since the last meeting, bits and pieces. 1 last year, but 2 already this year. And actually, that's the same numbers as we did last year, kind of. So we were reporting this last year, and it was 1, 4, and 4. And it's 1, 4, and 4. But there's sort of a +2 on there because 2 people who were doing method 2 have also done the method 1, which is kind of, normally people do it the other way around, but hey ho. So we actually had more people on courses doing bits and pieces. But thank you very much to those that hosted it. Without centres giving up their facilities or businesses giving up the facilities, then it's going to be difficult for us to train riggers in the future. So well done to those people who got that. I think we've now got 9 or 10 examiners, so it's the most we think we've ever had. Any questions or comments? So sorry it wasn't more exciting, but hopefully there's just a few bits there, give you food for thought. Yeah, so it'll be 35 minutes rather than 45. I'll set up for that. Okay, so thank you very much.